B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, August 31st, 2018. The final dog days of summer are marked by some funerals of national importance. In Detroit, royalty is rolled out for the farewell to the songstress Aretha Franklin, giving her the RESPECT that she so richly deserves after contributing so much to American music. And some officials had to attend Aretha's funeral in the morning and then fly to Washington for the ceremonies for Senator John McCain. And McCain's passing is marked by the typical happy talk, the hagiography. Only positive information is being presented in the corporate media. And I have resisted unloading on John McCain before he is buried. But as that is occurring, the ceremony today, internment at Annapolis over the weekend, I think it's important to note that John McCain's status as an all-American patriot and a political maverick, well, it's only partly true. And he deserves some respect for the times when he flipped the bird to his political party and stood in a singular fashion. But so often, those episodes were brief and inconsequential. So, for example, during the administration of George W. Bush, when we learned that people were being tortured and the true purpose of Guantanamo Bay and the use of Abu Ghraib in Iraq became clear to Americans, John McCain stood up and he said, look, I was tortured in North Vietnam and I oppose the use of torture by my country. That was a really shining moment for John McCain. But by the time he was running for president in 2008, desperate for the endorsement of George W. Bush, the man who had scurrilously attacked him for adopting a black child in the South Carolina primaries of 2000, well, John McCain forgot about torture and remembered that he needed the endorsement of the incumbent Republican at that time. And I can never forgive John McCain for his hawkishness. That campaign event where he had a cold and in a raspy voice, he tried to sing the old Beach Boys song, Barbara Ann, with the words, bomb, 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 Iran. I'll never forget that. And his relentless support for the war in Iraq, even as policies shifted and the meaningless surge took place. It revealed him as a man who was a dedicated warrior and never really saw a conflict that he was opposed to. Then there was the Keating 5 scandal, and I took a personal interest in that. Maybe you've heard me describe that Charles Keating, the financiopath, the guy who ran Lincoln Savings and Loan, blew it up into a big entity before it crashed, and he shoved a lot of campaign cash at John McCain, at California's Alan Cranston, at Dennis DeConcini of Arizona. John Glenn was in there, and I can't remember who the fifth is now. But in that episode, we learned how craven John McCain was and how he was willing to accept money from a nominal Democrat. Now, to his credit, John McCain, when the jig was up, he cooperated. And Joe Cotchett, who is the lawyer from California who prosecuted Charlie Keating, said that McCain was the only of the 5 senators who was willing to face the music. Then there is, of course, Sarah Palin. And his decision to name her as his running mate in 2008, it really opened the doors to what we have today. That anybody can run for president, that political discourse doesn't matter. All you have to do is have a snappy line. Palin didn't really take advantage of Twitter the way Trump does, but they are kindred spirits in that respect. And I'll end on a positive note. John McCain did frequently work across the aisle with people like Ted Kennedy on immigration issues, with people like Russ Feingold on campaign finance. And the McCain-Feingold law, while it lasted, was a good step in that direction. And so, as I sign off and say my last words about John McCain, it was a real mixed bag, but not nearly as positive as the corporate media would have you believe. And I've linked to two powerful essays by Max Blumenthal, the impressive young reporter who has done such incredible work this year exposing the reality in Nicaragua. And he published at Consortium News, I think the first piece that they've commissioned from Max, a piece called The Other Side of John McCain. And I won't run through it right here, but I encourage you to read it because it is an important antidote to the excessive hagiography of the corporate media send-off for McCain. Also, at the Gray Zone Project that Blumenthal runs, a piece that was published on August 20th exposes the role of the National Endowment for Democracy. And that was a group staunchly supported by Senator McCain, including its offshoot, the Republican Institute. Blumenthal goes to great detail to expose the role of the NED in hyping stories about torture and other evil deeds committed by the regime in North Korea. And some of that may be true, but the NED selectively uses that information, and they weaponize it, in the popular term, in ways that go beyond just promoting democracy. And it shows that the U.S. routinely interferes in elections, whether it's in South Korea or in Ukraine or in other countries around the world. So I encourage you to read this piece from Blumenthal. In particular, he notes that Nancy Pelosi supports the National Endowment for Democracy, and she tells a story about her trip to North Korea a few years back. But she rebuffed efforts by Blumenthal to get her to comment on the role of NED in rigging elections in other countries around the world. And Blumenthal also touches on the NED's role in Nicaragua going back to 1990, and he strongly believes that that is still the case today, as there is a real civil unrest there aimed at toppling the government of Daniel Ortega. And he also covers an event that, or a problem that showed up in the news just yesterday, and that has to do with the minority group in China, the Muslim group called the Uyghurs. Most Americans only know about Uyghurs because we had a handful who were held at Guantanamo Bay, and we couldn't park them when we tried to release them. China wouldn't allow them back in their country, and it was a very difficult problem for the Obama administration. So yesterday, Mike Pompeo, the current Secretary of State, most recently a CIA director, he hammered China for the ongoing human rights crisis. And there's some new satellite photos of what are believed to be re-education camps and concentration camps in the innermost regions of China, the far, far west of that country. And this is not a new story. We have known about the persecution of the Uyghurs. This is ethnic cleansing. It is apartheid. And Trump has never mentioned this to Xi Jinping in their various meetings since he took over in the White House. And human rights is not a central issue for the Trump administration anywhere in the whole world. He doesn't really care about Rohingya, about Uyghurs, or about anyone other than himself and his Twitter followers. So I think it's fascinating to see this story surface, and Max Blumenthal's piece talks about the role of the NED working with Uyghur Muslims, and it goes into some detail, and this is a serious problem, there's no doubt about it. But the way the U.S. responds to it is to try to use undercover, covert means to strengthen the opponents of the Chinese government while pretending that we have no involvement whatsoever. And, of course, that's bullshit. Here's an interesting effort, and it is framed in a very biased way in the report that I'm holding in my hands here from BuzzFeed News. Russia has started briefing against the U.S. military response to a chemical attack in Syria that has not occurred. Now, Russia has done this once before. They alerted the world, and the U.S. media ignored the alert, that there would be a false flag, an attempt to saddle the Syrian government of Bashar Assad with the claimed use of chemical weapons in the town of Douma. And the Russian prediction was deadly accurate. Now, Russia is warning that there may be another incident where chemical weapons are used in Idlib, the province that is the last remaining holdout of the rebels known as the Islamic State. So Russia's foreign minister this week at a press conference in Saudi Arabia said the West is actively heating up the idea of a so-called planned chemical attack by the Syrian government. He built on comments from other officials. "We warn the United States and its allies against new reckless moves," said Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. And so I can't predict the future here, but I find this fascinating that Russia, using its intelligence sources and whatever else it is picking up, has decided it's important to try to inoculate the public against an effort to frame the government of Syria with a chemical weapons incident. And this gets very complicated, of course. I'm still skeptical of the events of Khan Shaykhun in April of 2017, and I am unconvinced that it was a Syrian government use of a nerve agent in the town of Douma earlier this year. And so I think that the Russian warning is well-founded, and BuzzFeed's snarky approach to that, I think, exposes them as an extension of the U.S. propaganda machine. Interesting story in today's New York Times that the United Arab Emirates rulers, who are nominally enemies of the State of Israel, they do not recognize Israel diplomatically, well, they buy surveillance devices from Israeli security companies. And recently they were offered an upgraded system for a high price of spying technology, and they said, well, prove that it works. Show us that you could use this system to tap the phones of the Emir of Qatar. How about the phone of a powerful Saudi prince who directed the kingdom's National Guard? Or what about recording the phone of the editor of a London-based Arab newspaper? Well, within a few days, the Emiratis received a notification including links to 2 recordings of calls made by the editor of the London-based Arab newspaper. This was the proof of performance by a company called the NSO Group. And I take it that the Emiratis were impressed and they paid the price for the upgraded system. This is similar to what the NSO Group has sold to the government of Mexico on the explicit condition that it can only be used against criminals and terrorists. Yet some of Mexico's most prominent human rights lawyers, journalists, and anti-corruption activists have been targeted instead, and they are suing. So it shows the long arm of the Israeli intelligence and munitions industry and how their ordinary political alliances can be bent in the interest of selling these devices and maybe earning back-channel support from nominal adversaries. Interesting piece, too, in at the Intercept today under the byline of Murtaza Hussein, noting that Trump's efforts to move the U.S. the U.S. Embassy and recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, his cuts in aid to the UN relief organization that directly hammers the Palestinians, and, of course, the effort by Crown Prince Jared Kushner to formulate some sort of a peace plan. Well, Hussein says that what is taking shape here and becoming clear is that the strategy is to impose maximum pain on the Palestinians as a means of bullying them into submission. But it may backfire, and even former Israeli military officials have been sounding the alarm that the Trump administration's actions against the Palestinians, rather than leading to peace, are going to bring the region toward a new era of conflict. And in Haaretz this week, former Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson Peter Lerner criticized the administration's attempts to blackmail the Palestinians, saying it would lead to a power vacuum in the West Bank, and warning that hardballing the Palestinians into submission is likely to blow up on Israel's doorstep. And it was just last night that Trump was basking in the glow of another Trump mob rally, this one in Evansville, Indiana. And I managed to watch portions of it, about 40 minutes, on C-SPAN. And it really, it is so cringeworthy. He's just so repulsive. And he tries to read from a teleprompter, and then he ad-libs at great length. And his rambling stream of consciousness, such as it is just so bizarre. And even his MAGA fans with the red hats holding Trump posters, there are moments when you see the looks on their faces and they say, what the hell is he talking about? And why is he telling us that he's so smart and that he's more elite than the elites? It is a very strange performance that he puts on. And he panders shamelessly. There he is in the land of the Hoosiers, and he went on for maybe 5 or 7 minutes about the former Indiana University basketball coach, Bobby Knight. And he got applause from the Indianans there about Bobby Knight. But what he has to do with anything that's going on in our federal government right now is really hard to understand. And he takes these well-crafted pot shots at the Democrats, saying that they want open borders, that they're all interested in abolishing ICE. We know that's not true, but it's the kind of fake news that his fans just, lap up. Here's a quote. Today's Democrat Party is held hostage by left-wing haters, angry mobs, deep state radicals, establishment cronies, and their fake news allies. The biggest obstacle and their greatest ally actually is the media. And he repeated the line about how the media is the enemy of the people, despite the fact that one of his loyalists was arrested, a California man from Encino, for repeated phone calls, threatening phone calls to the Boston Globe newsroom. And he explicitly said to the Globe, whoever answered the phone, "You're the enemy of the people, and we're going to kill every fucking one of you." Now, Trump has to know that his words are inciting these kinds of people to threaten this kind of violent action. He knows it, and yet he doesn't stop, he doesn't modify it. At one point, he was talking about how Nancy Pelosi will not allow him to call the members of MS-13 animals. And so he had this riff where he just kept saying, I'm not allowed to call them animals. And of course he did. And the other piece that he, played on was how good Americans stand for the national anthem. Well, today, a little setback for Trump on the Colin Kaepernick front as the arbitrator in the case has allowed the collusion claim brought by Kaepernick against the NFL to move forward. Now, the team owners, the league, had made a substantial effort to get the arbitrator to dismiss the case completely, and that's not happening. It will go forward. Kaepernick has filed a collusion grievance after going unsigned as a free agent following his decision to opt out of a contract with the San Francisco 49ers and, of course, his decision to kneel during the national anthem. Here's another thing that I can't quite tell about what went on in Indiana last night, but there appears to be a Trump rally coming up in Phoenix. And on Craigslist, somebody captured an ad. It reads, "Actors needed, Phoenix Convention Center. Actors help needed for event from 2 to 11 p.m. Pay is $15 an hour. Duties include protest activity and holding signs that are pro-Trump. Minorities welcome and needed. Looking to fill about 500 spots." So Trump has to pay to fill out the mobs in these places? And then he says, oh, the media never looks at the crowd. They never show you how many people are here. It is truly bizarre. And Trump stoked his fan base, talking about his trade wars with a kind of gleeful approach. And right now, Trump is in the process of renegotiating NAFTA. Now, I opposed NAFTA, and while I don't know what the new terms are, I am not opposed to a renegotiation. But Trump is using the same secrecy approach that caused me to oppose Obama's Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that was one of the trade themes that Trump seized upon that did help him in the 2016 election cycle. And so Trump has apparently been able to make some sort of a deal with Mexico, and they're trying to squeeze Canada by giving them an arbitrary deadline to come online and fall into line today, and Canada is resisting. The foreign minister, Chrystia Freeland, had a 5-minute meeting at the White House at 10 p.m. last night and walked out with no new concessions. And so we will wait and see. Of course, Congress would have to pass NAFTA, and that's that's as unknown as the contents of the renegotiated package. And here's another item that Trump didn't mention at the mob rally last night. Nearly 500 migrant children, 497 to be exact, are still separated from their parents. Now, the Zero Tolerance program that ran from May 7th until June 20th, it left hundreds of these children separated from their parents, and that was the intention. They are hostages, the latest group that Trump has used to try to force passage of a bill to pay for the wall and other really retrograde immigration policies. Now, Trump did mention the wall last night, and he hammered the Democrats and Congress for just providing paltry funding for, development, essentially. A couple of billion here, a couple of billion there. The crowd didn't moan, and he didn't make any mention of his promise that Mexico would be paying for the damn wall. Yeah, a propagandist can get a mob like that to dance to his tune and ignore what they heard in the past. Trump also didn't mention the setback that was issued by a Washington-based federal court last week. A federal district judge struck down most of the key provisions of 3 executive orders Trump signed in May that would have made it easier to fire federal employees. And he retaliated this week. I don't know if this is a direct response, but I take it that way. He announced that he is not going to approve a pay raise of just under 3% for federal employees. I don't know how he thinks that's going to help Republicans in the midterm elections in November. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And I want to thank Margaret Anderson, Peggy, for renewing your subscription. I also want to thank Joe Clarici, Carl Howard, and Anna Gordonier for their ongoing stalwart support. We say farewell as a subscriber to Joe Davis, who notified me that he's canceling his subscription. He's got other podcasts that he listens to, and he said he's tired of hearing me talk about Russia. I'm tired of it too, Joe. But I do appreciate your support over the years, and you've been a great contributor via email many times. Also, Romeo Vitaliano canceled his annual subscription. I'm going to miss you, Romeo. You're the only Romeo who has been a supporter of my podcast. Now, that makes room for other people to step up. And here's your opportunity. Come on over to peterbcollins.com. Find the menu tab. Click on it, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and you can choose easy $5, $10, $20 a month, the $50 annual subscription. And if you're allergic to PayPal, yo comprendo. And yes, Hamish, I was wrong when I said yo comprende. Can you imagine what it's like to be corrected by an Australian when you mangle some Spanish? Once again, Hamish is right. At any rate, if you prefer to send me a check or a money order, you can do that to Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, zip code 94915. Peter B. Collins, Box 150-660, San Rafael, 94915. And if you're not a subscriber, I hope you will become one today. There is a new notch in in Robert Mueller's belt, and it's a friend of Paul Manafort, a guy named Sam Patten, who made $1 million as a political consultant for some of the same people that Manafort worked for. He also was linked to Cambridge Analytica, and he took a guilty plea for failing to register as a foreign agent. He also is accused of being a straw purchaser on behalf of a Russian oligarch. Sam Patten, paid $50,000 to the Trump Presidential Inauguration Committee and bought tickets for Konstantin Klimnik and some other people affiliated with Russia. Now, this is a prelude to the next trial of Paul Manafort, which includes the charges of failing to register as a foreign agent. And just maybe, Sam Patten is going to be testifying in that trial. Interesting piece published at The Hill this week by John Solomon. He took a look at the court filings that Mueller has made against George Papadopoulos, demanding that he do prison time because he lied to the FBI. But when this reporter, John Solomon, took a look at the FBI interview with Professor Joseph Mifsud, he is the kind of mysterious British professor who is described as the one who told Papadopoulos that there were emails that the Russians had on Hillary. Well, Mifsud denies that. He said that their conversations were just about academic topics, pursuit of peace. There was no talk of sinister cybersecurity intentions like Hillary Clinton's emails. And so the story here is very different from what Mueller spells out. Now, I think Papadopoulos is a schlub. He's a very minor player. He presents as a guy who is not really all there. And he didn't have a central role in the Trump campaign. There's another piece that I'm recommending to you with some reservation. It comes from Sarah Carter, who is deeply in the Hannity wing of the right-wing media cabal. But we don't get honest reporting from the left wing or even the center wing of the American corporate media. So Sarah Carter, who is a frequent guest on Sean Hannity's program, writes that a former Defense Department analyst named Adam Lovinger, who had been temporarily deployed to the Obama White House, was shipped back to the Pentagon and told to walk the halls or wash cars or something like that. His clearance was suspended because he stumbled onto the file of Stephen Halper. Now, Halper was teaching at Cambridge. He's this guy whose political dirty tricks go back to the Reagan era, and he was being paid $1 million in taxpayer-funded money to write Defense Department foreign policy reports. He also clearly did some spying, and he was the guy that they went to such great lengths to try to keep secret, but his role is public now. And again, consider the source, but I encourage you to read Sarah Carter's expose of Lovinger and the price he paid for stumbling on information about Stephen Halper. Also, speaking of the Russians and some of those conspiracy theories, I'm troubled to report that my good friend Norman Goldman, the progressive talk show host, his show's back on in San Francisco now on AM 910. And the last few days I've heard him twice hint that the Democratic gubernatorial candidate who surprised everyone and upset the field to win the Florida primary, Andrew Gillum, was somehow elected with help from Putin. And Goldman is just speculating based on what Senator Bill Nelson said about Russian hacking of the voting infrastructure in Florida. But there is zero evidence that hacking has had any impact or was even successful. And we talked about that related to Gareth Porter's piece yesterday. And so I don't know where Goldman gets the idea that Putin interfered and picked the black guy to run for governor of Florida. And Norm, I'd like you to offer us some substantiation of your inference. NBC is taking it on the chin as Ronan Farrow's former producer, Rich McHugh, has gone public accusing the network of blocking them from continuing their investigation into Harvey Weinstein. This occurred over a year ago, and Ronan Farrow took his work that NBC wouldn't publish over to the New Yorker. And it appears to me that NBC was responding to either threats or what they thought would be the risk of expensive lawsuits from Weinstein if they went with the story. And their revisionist excuses that they offer today that, oh gosh, they hadn't gotten an accuser on camera yet, it really doesn't wash. Teachers in Oklahoma and Arizona have fought back, and many of their ranks have been elected in the primaries for state legislature this year. And that's a good sign. But in Arizona, where Republican Governor Ducey was able to pack the court with 2 extra Republicans, the state Supreme Court blocked a ballot initiative that had been qualified with almost double the number of signatures required by teachers who were going to tax the rich in order to finance improvements in teacher pay and in funding for the public education system in Arizona. And the excuses are lame. The Supreme Court said, it was a little confusing. Voters might not understand exactly how much the tax on the rich would be, and they flushed it from the ballot in November. But over in North Carolina, the Republican Laboratory for Voter Suppression Development, a federal court has ordered them to redraw the congressional districts before the midterm November elections. Now, hopefully this won't be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has, throttled any efforts to bring a meaningful case about gerrymandering before the nation's top judges. And finally today, California has passed a flawed piece of legislation that does some good. It ends the cash bail system here. And that means that if you're arrested for a serious crime, a judge will evaluate your flight risk and your overall risk before deciding whether you must remain in jail. And it does change the terms. Rich people could buy their way out of the lockup before trial, and poor people haven't been able to do that. But the bill was watered down in the final steps of passage, and it does have some serious issues, but it's better than the failed system that is in place today. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. Have a great Labor Day weekend. We'll be back at you Tuesday right here at peterbcollins.com.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.